Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for your presence. Of course, with that, I would like to share with you something very, very important that we have to understand when we are learning the teachings of the Buddha. Of course, I have witnessed this truth for almost, I think, 30 years in my life, since the day I became a Buddhist monk. And at the same time, the education I had also supported me a lot to come to this level of understanding about the holistic view of Buddha's teaching. You know, some people would tend to think that since most of the part in the Buddha's teaching has been allocated to talk only about the unpleasant aspect, suffering of our lives. Buddha is a person, a kind of nihilistic person, and he is not optimistic. He has always been pessimistic, and like this, just by looking at not the positive views, positive, perspective of the Buddha's teaching, some people would tend to think that Buddhism is totally based on a discussion about suffering. Actually, that is not right, I have to say, because when we are going through the original teachings of the Buddha, we can find many places where Buddha has explained what we can use to have a very peaceful, very happy life in this life itself. So in today's talk, what I'm going to talk is, address is the balance between material and spiritual hierarchy. Okay? So when I mention about the word, hierarchy, this moment I remember a specific, approach, psychological perspective introduced by one of the greatest American psychologists who introduced this theory, I think, in between 1950 to 1960. It is, he is none other than but the Abraham Maslow, the greatest American psychologist, Abraham Maslow. And he introduced hierarchy of needs in his psychological perspective, which is humanistic psychology, in 1950 or something just like that, 1950 or 1960s. Then according to this theory, this approach, he says, in our lives, we of course have the potential to progress. We have the potential to progress to the maximum level, up to the utmost level. But in his perspective, he was concerned about to introduce this, this hierarchy of needs from very basic basic needs of a person's life. There he says only once only once our basic survival needs have been fulfilled, then after we do have the time to think about our higher level of psychological needs. And with that, of course, he went on introducing two more areas, higher level of areas of a person's life. Those are one of them is the self-actualization. Then towards the end of his life, after going through a lot of explorations, researches, he found out that there is a level called transcendental level also, in terms of a person's this hierarchy of needs. Now I think you remember what I said. Only once our basic needs are fulfilled, then only we have the time to think about our higher level of psychological needs. I'll explain what are those basic needs and psychological needs, and at the same time self-fulfillment needs. And at the same time, when we are going through the teachings of the Buddha, we can find a very specific discourse, a public talk given by the Buddha to the bhikkhus, and you can find this sutra in his original teaching, and this has been translated into English by different authors. So with that, I would like to quote a specific place of this particular sutra, this particular discourse. There, Buddha says, he introduced 10 successes, because since I mentioned about my topic, the balance between the material life and the spiritual life, when it is going through a hierarchy, how can we address this in conformity with the Buddha's teaching? Of course, Buddha in this particular sutra, this is not a very long sutra. You can find this if you can find the translation done by the Bhikkhu Bodhi, American monk Bhikkhu Bodhi, the numerical discourses of the Buddha. There I will mention, I can pinpoint the sutra, the page also. You can find this sutra under the title Growth on page 1430, right? There Buddha says, there seem to be 10 successes in our lives. Okay, the first 5 starts like this. Buddha says, I'll mention some of the Pali words also, since there are some people in the audience who are interested in the Pali language. And Buddha starts these 10 successes with the first one. He says, Ketta Vattuhi Vaddati. That means the person who is interested in ascending this hierarchy of needs, spiritual needs, he starts his journey with the first one. He has he grows in fields and lands. He grows in fields and lands. This is just only a literary translation, and I will explain it later. And the second one is in wealth and grain. Third one is in wives and children. Okay, and the fourth one is in workers and servants. Fifth one is in livestock. That's how he starts it. Those are the 5 areas that we can find in conformity with, in our the happiness of our present life. So when he mentioned about the first one like this, I'll first quote it. He says, because growing in 10 ways, a noble disciple grows by a noble growth, and he absorbs the essence and the best of this life. What 10? He grows in fields and land, in wealth and grain, in wives and children, in slaves, workers and servants, in livestock. Sixth one begins from sixth one to the 10th one. In faith, virtuous behavior, learning, generosity, and wisdom. Growing in these 10 ways, a noble disciple grows by a noble growth, and he absorbs the essence and the best of this life. Now this quotation is just alone enough for you to understand whether Buddha represents a kind of a person like, nihilistic, whether he was pessimistic. When he presented the first 5 aspects of these successes, he said that the noble disciple, this is highly important when it comes to his original teaching with the Pali language. It is called Arya Savaka, the noble disciple. Who is this noble disciple? How can we differentiate this noble disciple from the ordinary, from an ordinary person? Or is he the same person just like an ordinary person? The noble disciple. And at the same time, he says that in this particular sutra, he mentions the best way to absorb the essence in our life. So what is this best way to absorb, to take out the essence of our life? This is highly important. So I'll explain it. Who is this noble disciple? And what are those 10 successes? How can we use these 10 successes in our life to ascend in this spiritual, material and spiritual hierarchy of our needs? Actually, when we are going through the sutra, we can understand that this noble disciple, Arya Savaka, he is a person with self-fulfillment, and he is searching for meaning of life. Other than if we just forget about the other part, the self-actualization, because we all are going towards self-actualization in our life. If we follow the Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then after that we have to come to the level of transcendental level also in our life one day, if our sole purpose is to find the final bliss, a final solution for this suffering. Then first I will explain the hierarchy of needs presented by Abraham Maslow. And he says that in this hierarchy of needs, it starts with the basic needs such as physiological needs. It could be our food, warmth, and other things also. And at the same time, in basic needs, we can find some safety needs also. We should have some kind of security, insurance. assurance in our life to go ahead. So that is the basic, basic needs what Abraham Maslow presented in his theory, in his perspective, humanistic psychology. So, and at the same time, when we are going through this ascending, when in this hierarchy of needs, then we come to the second level, which is psychological needs. Remember, always we have to remember, only if our basic needs are satisfied, fulfilled, then we do have the time to think about our psychological needs, such as belongingness and our love needs. Maybe it is affection, and at the same time maybe it is love and some kind of intimacy with through good relationships, and like this friends, well-wishers. Those are our psychological needs. And at the same time, Abraham Maslow refers in his psychological needs, such as esteem needs. We have to be respected to have again a respected life in this life. We should need some kind of prestige and feeling of some kind of accomplishments, personal respect. So those things can be categorized in the second level, psychological needs. Then when we come to the third level, in ascending the hierarchy of needs as presented by psychologist Abraham Maslow, actually it is the self-fulfillment needs. So what could be these self-fulfillment needs? It is nothing but the self-actualization. So when a person approaches this self-actualization, he of course is satisfied with his life. That means he has come to the best level, the highest level of his success in this life. So actualization is nothing but the innate tendency to strive to realize one's potential, one's full potential. And at the same time, such a person of course would tend to make the personal growth choices rather than fear choices when a person reaches this self-actualization level. And at the same time, he is not worried about his lost past. What people would like to do is in their life, they of course repent about their lost past. So instead of repenting about the past, those who have reached to the level, the self-actualization, they of course strive very hard to go with their, future perspectives. This is the nature of a person who is endowed with, a self-actualization. So now this is quite clear. And at the same time, towards the latter part of life, this, American psychologist Abraham Maslow, he found that there is not only self-actualization in our life. So when we come to the self-actualization level, of course, people find their life something very, happy, peaceful, and at the same time, maybe it is, sometimes in the self-actualization level, you can be a film producer, sometimes a greatest pianist in the world, and like this that is the nature of self-actualization. And because I of course use this hierarchy of needs introduced by American psychologist Abraham Maslow to explain something about what we can see in this particular sutra, growth. In Pali it is called Vaddi Sutra, explained by the Buddha. So when we are going through this small sutra, this earlier I told you, remember, this is not a very long, big sutra. You can find this as a very small sutra in the numerical discourses of the Buddha as translated by the Bhikkhu Bodhi. And there, the first 5 factors, of course, deal with the growth, the success in this life, in this very life itself. So since it starts with the first one, as I produced, I remembered you, Buddha says that the noble person develops, he succeeds, he grows in fields and land like this, So those things are related to, of course, the success of our life. It could be the success of our movable and immovable assets in our life. We have to find, a good job first. We have to work very hard. And at the same time, this could be the growth, or this could be the success of our, our career, our education, and at the same time, maybe it is our some other things related to our personal life. This is the success, the 5 aspects. So when the Buddha advised something just like, the noble disciple grows, the noble disciple succeeds in livestock. Of course, those things we have to understand in relevance to the society Buddha lived at that time. Because if a person have a great, livestock, animals and farms, then such a person could be regarded as a very rich person. So he has gained, he has achieved the success in this life. And at the same time, we should not forget about our family members, because I just thought about talking about this topic, because sometimes there are people when they are fed up with their life, and at the same time when they are going through through the teachings of the Buddha, they tend to give up everything, okay, and they start practicing meditation, and sometimes they start practicing some other things in the teachings of the Buddha, and they totally forget about that they have a personal life, they have some kind of happy life in this world. So they totally forget about how to attend to their family needs, and they forget about attending the parties, how to spend their valuable time with their friends and like this, and they totally dedicate their whole time, they spend their whole time sometimes practicing meditation. And with this, what happens naturally is he will create, such a person would definitely create a mess a mess in his life. That is why Buddha categorically, he especially mentioned that first you have to think about the success, your personal growth in this life, before you are going towards the second part of your life, which is the self-fulfillment, maybe which is transcendental needs, I would like to say. So from the 6th aspect, the last one in this sutra, you can particularly find the 5 aspects, like the first one is saddhaya vaddati. He has to be, he has to succeed in faith. Faith means here it is the confidence. In the sutra you cannot find a very a long discussion or a description in detail, but this is of course the confidence, what you are doing in terms of your spiritual, in your spirituality. Second, in the 7th one, Buddha mentions that the noble disciple grows, he succeeds in virtuous behavior. You have to practice more morality in your life. The more you try to appreciate, the more you try to enjoy the things in this world, it is okay, but the problem is there is no chance for us to see the unpleasant aspect of our life. So you have to be a moral person. So you have to practice virtuous behavior. The eighth factor is, it is learning. This is nothing but this is all about our education. We have to read something. You can read something. You can learn something. We have a lot of chances in our life to be educated. Okay, to go ahead with our readings. I mean our learning part. The ninth factor is, it is generosity. We have to give something to somebody. If you are practicing the spirituality of Buddha's teaching, then of course you have to give something. There are a lot of ways that we can practice this generosity. We can give sometimes our happiness. We can dedicate our time. We can sometimes share our knowledge with the others. So like this we can practice. There are lots of ways that we can practice giving or generosity. Then the last one is it is wisdom. So while we are ascending this hierarchy of needs, spiritual needs, what naturally happens is you will definitely come to a level called wisdom inside, because you are always dealing with the inside. So in this particular, according to this particular sutra, or even when we are going through the hierarchy of needs presented by Abraham Maslow, we can find it very well. Buddha has never ever forgotten to talk about the happiness, the success of our in this life, in this very life itself. Only if we are satisfied. Remember what the Abraham Maslow said? He said that only if our basic needs are satisfied, then we do have the time to think about our higher level of psychological needs. That is the same thing even when you are going through the teachings of the Buddha, what you can find. Right? So only if you are leading a very happy life, maybe it is with your wife, with your children, with your family members, friends, like this, then you do have the time to think about, because you are happy, you are contented. You are at the same time you are reaching to the level self-actualization. Some would, those who are visiting our, IBMC, and those who are not, absent today, whoever it is, sometimes there are people, they need to be a good speaker sometimes, and at the same time they need to share their Dhamma knowledge, and at the same time, if we forget about that part, he needs to be a good father, a good husband, she needs to be a good wife. Of course you have a lot of ways and means to come to this level. So Buddha never ever has forgotten this aspect. Of course he addressed this in many of his sutras, and at the same time that is not the one and only facet that we have to be concerned about in our life. That means the success or happiness in this life. Of course we have to think that there is another level. The second part is the spirituality. So when we are ascending through the spirituality, finally you should feel that like this, I'm of course loaded both in materiality and spirituality. I have more than enough. I'm healthier. My relationship with others is also healthier. I'm abundant for living. I have positive, perspectives in terms of my future goals, and like this. before I come to the conclusion of my Dhamma sharing today, I would like to differentiate the ordinary person with that, the noble disciple. Ordinary person, how does an ordinary person think about his life? Of course, an ordinary person, he thinks and he pursues, he understands this life, life like, he thinks that this is his holistic view about the whole world, including himself. He thinks that this is mine. This world is mine. Everything is mine. This is mine. This I am. And this is myself. Right? That is how an ordinary person thinks. And how does a noble person think? A noble disciple perceives this world, including himself. He thinks that this is not mine. That means this world is not mine. Even though he is happy, even though he is contented with the success his present life, and even though he is ascending the hierarchy of spiritual needs, he thinks that this is not mine. This I am not, and this is not myself. That is the difference. And other than that, you can find a lot of explanations regarding what sort of a person a noble disciple is in the noble teachings of the Buddha. Of course, I would just by mentioning that also, I would like to come to the conclusion of my Dhamma talk today. Noble disciple is nothing but the stream attainer, the one who has achieved the first step of the 4 stages in spiritual success in Buddhism. The first one is the stream attainer, second one is the once returner, third one is the non-returner, the last one is the Arahant, the fully perfect, the fully awakened person. That means he will never ever be reborn in this samsara. So with that, please think about this, how we can balance this material and at the same time spiritual aspects in our life. Buddha, of course, has mentioned, he has explained, he has given many teachings in terms of the success of our present life and at the same time the spiritual life also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.